A new beginning. Michael Johnson stood at the base of Whitman Enterprises, gazing up at the imposing skyscraper that glittered in the morning sun. The building was a symbol of corporate success, a glass and steel fortress that looked unshakable, powerful. But Michael knew that appearances could be deceiving. Inside this glistening exterior lay a company whose foundation was cracking, a corporation that had drifted away from the people who kept it alive. Michael straightened his modest gray suit and took a deep breath, feeling a steady thrum of purpose within him. Today, he wasn't just starting a new job. He was stepping into a world that needed transformation. A few months prior, his longtime mentor, Richard Whitman, had called him in for a quiet meeting at his home. Richard was a formidable figure, seasoned, shrewd, and known for his visionary leadership. He was also weary, his eyes shadowed with the weight of decades spent steering his corporation through waves of change. But in recent years, Richard had grown disillusioned. Frustrated by the corporate machine, his company had become disconnected from its original ideals. "I can't keep doing this, Michael," Richard had confessed, sipping his scotch. "The company has lost its way. It's become soulless. All these executives care about are the quarterly profits. They've forgotten the people who drive those numbers, the real heartbeat of Whitman Enterprises." His voice softened, his gaze intent. "I trust you. I need you to take over and restore the soul of this place." When Richard asked him to assume the role of CEO, Michael hadn't been surprised. Their relationship had grown out of a shared philosophy, a belief that leadership wasn't just about numbers but about people. But Richard had a final, unusual request. "Start at the bottom, Michael. Get to know the company from the ground up. Only then will you know how to lead it." Michael agreed, recognizing the wisdom in Richard's words. Today, he was about to walk through the doors not as the CEO, but as a low-level employee, a newcomer to Whitman Enterprises, just another face in the crowd. Entering the building. As Michael stepped through the lobby, the polished marble floors gleamed under his feet, and the air hummed with quiet efficiency. A few people glanced at him as they passed, eyes flickering briefly over his unassuming attire before moving on. No one here recognized him, and that was exactly how he wanted it. He approached the front desk, where a young receptionist with vibrant red glasses sat, typing away at her computer. She didn't look up as he approached, her focus glued to the screen. "Name?" she asked, fingers poised over the keyboard. "Michael Johnson," he replied. She typed his name, handed him a temporary badge, and gestured toward the elevators with a barely interested, "Third floor, far end of the hall." Michael accepted the badge without comment, a faint smile playing on his lips. This was his first glimpse into the company's culture, a place where efficiency seemed to trump engagement, even in simple interactions. He took the elevator to the third floor, watching the numbers rise with a sense of quiet determination. The third floor was far from the luxurious executive suites he was used to. Here, the decor was minimalistic, functional. As he stepped out, he noticed the hum of activity, a rhythm of phones ringing, keyboards clicking, papers rustling. This was the logistics department, the heart of the company's operations, where goods were managed, tracked, and dispatched. The logistics department. Michael's cubicle was at the far end of the room. It was a small beige-walled space with a standard computer and basic office supplies. Compared to the expansive offices and leather-bound chairs of the executive floors, this space was as modest as it got. He placed his things down, took a seat, and powered up his computer, familiarizing himself with the company's logistics software. From his research, he knew it was outdated and not user-friendly, a testament to the company's need for modernization. As he worked, he couldn't help but observe his surroundings. Employees buzzed around him, some stopping briefly to glance at the new face in the cubicle, but most too busy to offer more than a polite nod. He was, to them, a nobody, a fresh hire with little significance. It suited him perfectly. First impressions of the work culture. Soon, Michael's manager, a mid-level supervisor named Carl, walked by. Carl was sharp-featured and brisk, his manner curt and businesslike. He barely looked at Michael as he introduced himself, rattling off a list of tasks without much context or instruction. Michael nodded, keeping his responses short, aware that Carl's treatment mirrored how he likely regarded all newcomers. Disposable, there to follow orders and ask few questions. Make sure you get the inventory list updated by noon. And try not to mess it up, Carl added, a hint of disdain in his voice as he walked away. Michael's calm demeanor didn't waver, but he made a mental note. It was clear that Carl's leadership style leaned toward micromanagement, with little regard for the development or morale of his team. In his time here, Michael would need to understand not just the processes but the people, their motivations, their frustrations, their struggles, subtle prejudice, and condescension. Later in the day, as he walked to the break room to grab a coffee, he overheard two employees whispering near the vending machine. They didn't notice him, their attention fixed on their conversation. "Did you see the new guy? Looks like he barely knows how to use a computer," one of them said, chuckling. "Probably another temp. He won't last long here," the other replied with a dismissive shrug. Michael smiled inwardly, unbothered by their comments. He was here to learn, to observe, and he had no intention of responding to every slight. As he returned to his cubicle, he reflected on the irony of it all. These people had no idea who he was, nor what he was here to do. But in time, they would understand. Reflection and preparation. As the workday drew to a close, Michael sat quietly in his cubicle, taking a moment to process everything he had observed. The whispers, the dismissive attitudes, the outdated systems, all were pieces of a larger puzzle, each one offering a clue to the deeper issues that had eroded the company's foundation. He pulled out a notebook and began jotting down his observations, his mind clear and focused. Every interaction, every detail he encountered today would serve as a piece of his strategy. Richard had entrusted him with a mission, and he was determined not to let him down. For now, he would remain in the shadows, just another face in the crowd. But soon, he would begin to reveal his vision, piece by piece, until Whitman Enterprises became not just a powerful corporation, but a place where people mattered, where every individual felt valued. As he closed his notebook and turned off his computer, Michael couldn't help but feel a quiet satisfaction. His journey here was just beginning, but already he could see the path ahead. And though he knew the road would be challenging, he was ready. With a steady heart and a mind filled with purpose, Michael Johnson left the building, knowing that tomorrow would bring new lessons, new insights, and, eventually, the respect he deserved. The struggles beneath the surface. The next morning, Michael Johnson arrived at Whitman Enterprises earlier than most. The sun had barely risen, casting a muted golden glow over the city as he walked through the revolving doors and into the lobby. His reflection flashed across the glass walls, a quiet reminder of his humble beginnings and the journey that had brought him here. Today was not just another day at the office. It was a chance to dig deeper, to better understand the culture he would one day lead. As he reached the logistics department on the third floor, Michael took a moment to observe the atmosphere. The energy here was markedly different from the upper floors he'd glimpsed yesterday. People hurried past one another, their faces marked with faint lines of fatigue, barely acknowledging those around them. Michael could feel a weight in the air, an unspoken tension that clung to the employees, heavy and pervasive. He knew it well. It was the weariness of people who had been undervalued, overworked, and underappreciated. Meeting the team. Michael's first meeting of the day was with his supervisor, Carl, who had made little effort to connect with him the day before. Today, Carl seemed equally uninterested in fostering any kind of working relationship. "All right, Johnson, here's the rundown," Carl began without preamble. "Today's tasks are straightforward. We've got inventory checks, delivery updates, and a full report to complete by end of day. And since you're new, I'm expecting you to catch up quickly. There's no room for errors here." Michael listened intently, taking mental notes. Despite Carl's clipped tone, he maintained an air of respect, nodding as Carl continued. "I'll be checking your work later," Carl added with a faint smirk, a hint of superiority creeping into his expression. As Carl walked away, Michael took a deep breath, resolving to complete each task with care and precision. He knew he could impress Carl if he wanted to, but that wasn't his purpose. Instead, he focused on learning the processes, noting where the system could be improved. Over time, he would understand not only the work, but also the human dynamics at play here. The encounter in the break room. Around mid-morning, Michael decided to take a short break. He headed to the break room, a modest space with a few tables, a microwave, and a coffee machine that seemed to have seen better days. As he prepared his coffee, two employees entered, deep in conversation. They gave him a brief nod, clearly aware he was new, but quickly returned to their discussion. "Have you seen the new overtime policy?" One of them, a woman named Jenny, asked, her tone laced with frustration. "They're cutting hours again, but expecting us to hit the same targets." The man beside her, Steve, shook his head. "Yeah, and Carl just piles on more work without a second thought. It's like they don't care if we have lives outside this place." Michael listened quietly, his eyes on his coffee, but his mind attentive to their grievances. It became evident that morale was low, especially among the junior staff, who felt squeezed by high demands and low rewards. This insight confirmed what he suspected. The company had lost sight of its people in the pursuit of profit and efficiency. Seeing Michael listening, Jenny turned to him with a small smile. "You're the new guy, right? Bet you're already seeing how things work around here." Michael returned her smile, nodding slightly. "I'm just trying to keep up so far. But yeah, I can see it's a fast-paced environment." Jenny scoffed, rolling her eyes. "That's one way to put it. They expect a lot for what little they give in return." The words hung in the air, heavy with bitterness. Michael made a mental note of her comments, recognizing that her experience reflected a widespread dissatisfaction. He knew that changing the company's culture would require addressing these issues head-on. Challenges in the workplace. Back at his desk, Michael tackled the day's tasks with focused intent, carefully updating inventory records, cross-checking details, and preparing reports. Despite his expertise and years of experience, he found himself slightly frustrated by the outdated software, which slowed his work and made simple tasks cumbersome. The inefficiencies in the system were glaringly obvious, highlighting another area where the company had neglected to invest in its infrastructure. As the day wore on, Carl made rounds, glancing at his employees' work with a critical eye. When he reached Michael, he skimmed over his report, barely acknowledging the accuracy and detail Michael had put into it. Instead, Carl offered a dismissive nod, clearly uninterested in offering any constructive feedback. "This'll do," he said flatly, moving on to the next person without a second glance. Michael's calm expression didn't falter, but he made a note of Carl's management style. Unapproachable, indifferent, and driven by results rather than people. It was precisely the kind of leadership Richard had hoped to change, and Michael now saw firsthand why the company had been struggling internally. A meeting turned sour. Toward the end of the day, Carl called an impromptu team meeting in the conference room. Michael joined the others, taking the seat near the back to observe. Carl strode to the front, holding a stack of papers with an air of authority, glancing around the room with a critical eye. "As you know, we're behind on this quarter's targets," Carl began, his tone stern. "I've been looking at your reports, and I have to say, I'm not impressed. Our clients expect better, and if we can't deliver, there will be consequences." Michael glanced around, noticing the tension that had quickly settled over the room. His colleagues exchanged uncomfortable looks, clearly used to this type of reprimand. Carl's words were a reminder that here, employees weren't encouraged or motivated. They were managed through fear. "Jenny," Carl called out, pointing to the young woman Michael had spoken to earlier, "your numbers are consistently below average. If you can't get it together, I'll have to find someone who can." Jenny's face reddened as she looked down, avoiding Carl's harsh gaze. It was evident that Carl was not only reprimanding her but attempting to set an example. However, instead of motivating the team, his approach only deepened the resentment. Unable to stand by without intervening, Michael cleared his throat softly, drawing Carl's attention. Perhaps there's a way to address these issues without singling people out. Sometimes, improving the processes can make a difference. Carl raised an eyebrow, clearly irritated by the comment. And who exactly do you think you are, Johnson, to offer advice on how we do things here? Michael met Carl's gaze steadily. Just someone with a bit of experience. I think we can accomplish more if we work together as a team, rather than putting all the pressure on individuals. Carl scoffed, brushing off Michael's suggestion. You're new here, Johnson. Maybe focus on learning the ropes before you start lecturing us on teamwork. The room fell silent, and Michael nodded, calmly accepting Carl's response. But he knew that this exchange had revealed more than Carl intended. It showed how fragile the leadership was, and how desperately this company needed change. His colleagues looked at him with surprise, some with subtle admiration for speaking up, but Michael didn't need praise. He was here to transform, not to impress. End of the day reflection. As the meeting ended and people filtered out, Michael lingered for a moment, deep in thought. He had seen the inner workings of this team, the frustration, the inefficiency, and the pervasive fear that stifled growth and innovation. He felt a renewed sense of responsibility, a determination to bring genuine change, not only for the employees who kept this company afloat, but also for the legacy Richard had entrusted him with. When he left the building that evening, Michael's resolve was stronger than ever. Tomorrow, he would dig deeper, learning from every interaction and taking each small step toward the goal he had set with Richard. It was a long road, but Michael was ready. He would be patient, he would be observant, and when the time was right, he would reveal himself, not just as the new CEO, but as the leader Whitman Enterprises needed, gaining allies and uncovering deeper issues. The next morning, Michael arrived at Whitman Enterprises with a renewed sense of purpose. His observations over the past 2 days had given him valuable insight into the company's culture, but he knew he needed to connect with the people on a personal level if he was to lead effectively. Today, his goal was clear: establish trust with his coworkers, hear their stories, and understand the deeper issues that were draining morale. As he entered the logistics department, he noticed Jenny and Steve by the coffee machine, chatting in hushed voices. They greeted him with a friendly nod, and he took this as an opportunity to join their conversation, hoping to gain more insight into their experiences. Building trust with colleagues. Morning, Michael said, offering them a warm smile. Mind if I join you? Not at all, Jenny replied, her tone brighter than it had been in the previous days. She seemed relieved to have someone to talk to, someone who didn't look down on her or judge her work based solely on numbers. We were just talking about Carl's latest meeting, Steve said with a weary chuckle. It's the same every time. He singles people out, makes them feel small, and then acts like he's done us all a favor. Michael nodded thoughtfully. I noticed that. It seems like there's a lot of pressure here, but not much support to go along with it. Jenny sighed, her eyes fixed on her coffee. It's like they want us to succeed but don't give us the tools or encouragement to do so. Every time I try to suggest an improvement, Carl dismisses it outright. He doesn't see us as people with ideas. He just sees us as cogs in a machine. Michael's heart went out to her. He could tell that Jenny, like many others, had untapped potential that was being stifled by a culture of micromanagement and fear. She was clearly capable and driven, but her environment had left her feeling unappreciated and powerless. You know, Michael said gently, sometimes change has to start from the ground up. You might not see it yet, but even small actions can make a big difference. Jenny looked up, surprised by his words. It was as though no one had ever encouraged her to think beyond her current role, to consider that she might have the power to make a positive impact, however small. Michael could see the spark of hope in her eyes, and he knew he was planting the seeds of change, uncovering systemic problems. After their brief chat, Michael returned to his cubicle, diving into the day's work with fresh determination. As he sorted through files, updated inventories, and worked with the clunky logistics software, he started making a list of systemic issues he noticed within the department. These weren't just minor inefficiencies. Many were roadblocks that were actively hindering productivity and employee satisfaction. By midday, he had compiled a detailed list. Outdated technology. The logistics software was not only slow but also riddled with glitches, causing employees to spend more time troubleshooting than completing tasks. Lack of training programs. New hires were given little to no guidance, forced to learn on the fly in a high-stakes environment. It was clear that employees felt unsupported, especially when facing complex challenges. Micromanagement. Carl's leadership style focused on control rather than empowerment, leaving employees feeling incapable of contributing meaningfully. Poor communication channels. The lack of open communication between departments had created bottlenecks in information flow, leading to confusion and misalignment on priorities. Michael knew these issues couldn't be resolved overnight, but documenting them was a crucial first step. When the time came, he would present these findings to the board as part of his plan to rebuild the company from within. A surprising ally. In the afternoon, Michael was approached by an unexpected visitor, Helen, a senior manager from a different department. Helen was well known within the company for her no-nonsense approach and her unwavering dedication to her team. She had a reputation for standing up for her people, a rarity in the company's rigid hierarchy. "Michael, right?" she asked, her eyes sharp but friendly. "Yes, that's me," he replied, extending a hand. "Nice to meet you." Helen shook his hand firmly, studying him with a curiosity that suggested she saw through his unassuming role. "I've been hearing some interesting things about you," she said, her tone matter-of-fact. "Word travels fast around here, and people have noticed that you seem different." Michael smiled, appreciating her candor. "I suppose I have a different perspective. I'm here to learn as much as I can, and maybe understand what could be improved." Helen nodded thoughtfully. "We need more people like you around here. Too many just fall in line without questioning anything. I'll be honest, I've tried pushing for change myself, but it's like hitting a brick wall. The upper management is so focused on numbers that they don't see what's happening on the ground level." She paused, studying him for a moment. "Keep doing what you're doing. People are noticing, and I have a feeling you're going to make a difference here." With that, she walked away, leaving Michael with a sense of validation. He realized he'd found an ally in Helen, someone who, like him, believed in the importance of people and was willing to stand up for her team. He made a mental note to connect with her again, knowing that her insights could be invaluable as he gathered more information about the company's internal struggles. An unwelcome confrontation. Later that day, as Michael was focused on his work, Carl appeared beside his cubicle, arms crossed and face set in a scowl. It was clear he was unhappy. "Johnson," he said, his voice laced with irritation, "I don't know what you're trying to do here, but people are talking. They're saying you're asking a lot of questions, sticking your nose where it doesn't belong." Michael looked up calmly, meeting Carl's gaze. "I'm just trying to understand the work and get to know my team better. It helps me do my job more effectively." Carl scoffed. "Your job is to follow instructions, not to play detective. Stick to what you're told, or you'll find yourself out of here faster than you can say logistics." Michael maintained his composure, giving Carl the respectful nod. "Understood. I'll be mindful of my approach." Satisfied, Carl walked away, but Michael knew that this encounter was a turning point. Carl saw him as a threat, and it was only a matter of time before he tried to undermine him further. However, Michael was prepared for this challenge. He had no intention of letting Carl's insecurity derail his mission. Finding strength in community. At the end of the day, as his coworkers gathered their things and prepared to leave, Michael took a moment to chat with them, keeping the conversation light but genuine. He shared a laugh with Steve, asked Jenny about her weekend plans, and even offered a few words of encouragement to a young intern who seemed overwhelmed. Bit by bit, Michael was building a rapport with his colleagues. They were beginning to see him not just as the new guy, but as someone they could trust. This sense of community, however small, was exactly what the department needed, a reminder that they were not alone in their struggles. As he left the building that evening, Michael felt a renewed sense of determination. He wasn't just here to observe. He was here to lay the foundation for something lasting. Today, he had gained an ally, documented systemic issues, and built a few bridges among his team. It was a small step, but one that brought him closer to his ultimate goal. In the coming days, he would need to push harder, continue challenging the status quo, and keep the morale of his coworkers alive. But for now, he allowed himself a moment of satisfaction, knowing that every interaction, every insight, was bringing him closer to the moment when he could reveal his true role. And when that moment came, he wouldn't just be a leader in title, he would be a leader in spirit, a force for change that would resonate throughout Whitman Enterprises. Rising tensions and hidden strengths. Michael Johnson arrived at Whitman Enterprises on his 4th day with an unyielding resolve. His interactions over the past days had opened his eyes to the challenges his coworkers faced, and he was determined to make meaningful connections while continuing his careful observations. His subtle influence was starting to take root, but the pressures within the company were also growing. The day started quietly, but as Michael settled at his cubicle, the energy in the department felt more charged than usual. There were whispers of a high-profile client meeting scheduled for the afternoon, and employees were tense, anticipating another of Carl's abrasive briefings. Knowing that this meeting could be an opportunity to learn more about the company's approach to handling clients and pressure, Michael prepared himself for what lay ahead. Observing the client meeting preparation. Around mid-morning, Carl called an urgent team meeting in the conference room. Michael joined the others, taking a seat near the back as usual, hoping to observe without drawing attention. Carl stood at the front, looking more tense than ever, his gaze sharp as he scanned the faces of his team. "As you all know, we're meeting with one of our top clients today," Carl began, his tone stern. "This client has been with us for years, and any mistakes today will reflect poorly on all of us. I don't want to see a single error in the reports or presentations." "Understood." The team nodded in unison, but Michael could feel the apprehension growing among them. Carl's leadership style left no room for questions or suggestions. He expected compliance without providing encouragement. Michael knew this high-pressure approach would likely lead to mistakes, as fear stifled people's confidence and creativity. Carl continued, directing specific instructions to each team member. When he reached Jenny, he assigned her a particularly complex part of the presentation, making it clear he would hold her personally responsible if anything went wrong. "Jenny, I hope you understand the importance of accuracy in your section," Carl said, his voice dripping with warning. "The last thing we need is for you to make another mistake." Jenny's face turned pale, and Michael noticed her hands shaking slightly as she took notes. He felt a pang of sympathy for her. She was capable, but Carl's intimidation tactics were taking a toll on her confidence. Michael decided he would find a way to support her without drawing Carl's ire. A quiet moment of support. During lunch, Michael found Jenny sitting alone in the break room, staring anxiously at her notes. He approached her gently, sensing she needed reassurance. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, his tone calm and friendly. Jenny looked up, offering him a weak smile. "Of course, I could use the company." He sat beside her, glancing at her notes. "I know it's a high-stakes meeting, but you've got this. I've seen your work, and I know you're capable." Jenny sighed, rubbing her temples. "Thanks, Michael. It's just, Carl's expectations are impossible. He makes me feel like every tiny mistake will cost me my job." Michael nodded, understanding her frustration. "It's hard to do your best under that kind of pressure. But remember, you're not alone in this. If there's anything I can help you with, just let me know." Jenny seemed to relax a little, her shoulders easing as she smiled gratefully. "Thanks, Michael. It really means a lot to know someone has my back." As they finished their lunch, Michael felt a renewed sense of purpose. His quiet support was making a difference, and he knew that even small gestures could empower people to stand a little taller. He resolved to be a steady presence, helping his coworkers find confidence in themselves. The client meeting. That afternoon, the team gathered in the boardroom, the air thick with tension. The client representatives, a distinguished-looking man and woman in business attire, sat at the head of the table, flipping through their prepared materials as Carl introduced the team. Michael watched intently as the meeting began, taking in every interaction, every exchange. Carl led the presentation, maintaining a rigid tone as he walked through their progress and goals. Occasionally, he deferred to team members for specific updates, each person delivering their piece with a practiced, if slightly nervous, demeanor. When it was Jenny's turn to present, Michael could see her anxiety rising. She took a deep breath, launching into her section with a steady voice, but halfway through, she stumbled over a minor detail. Carl's gaze hardened, his fingers tapping impatiently on the table. Jenny's face flushed as she quickly corrected herself, but Michael could see the toll this moment took on her confidence. After Jenny finished, Carl took over smoothly, but not before giving her a brief, disappointed glance. The meeting continued without further issues, but the atmosphere had shifted, tension lingering in the air as Carl wrapped up the presentation. The clients nodded approvingly, expressing satisfaction with the team's performance. They shook hands with Carl and the others, leaving the boardroom with polite smiles. As soon as they were gone, Carl's expression darkened. Carl's public criticism. The moment the clients exited, Carl turned to face the team, his voice low and cutting. "I don't know what that was, but it was barely acceptable. Jenny, I thought I made it clear that mistakes were not an option today." Jenny looked down, her face flushed, avoiding Carl's glare. Michael clenched his jaw, frustrated by Carl's unfair criticism. Jenny had done well under immense pressure, and yet Carl focused only on her minor error, dismissing her effort entirely. Feeling a responsibility to intervene, Michael raised his hand slightly, catching Carl's attention. "Carl, if I may," Michael began, keeping his tone respectful but firm. "The team did well today. Mistakes happen, but they don't define the quality of the work." Jenny handled her section professionally and corrected herself quickly. Carl's gaze narrowed as he looked at Michael, clearly irritated by the unexpected defense. "I appreciate your input, Johnson," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "But you're new here. Maybe once you've been around longer, you'll understand that we don't tolerate slip-ups." Michael held Carl's gaze steadily, refusing to back down. "I understand that high standards are important, but so is supporting our team. People do their best when they feel valued, not when they're singled out." The room fell silent, tension hanging thick as Carl stared at Michael, his jaw clenched. Without another word, Carl turned on his heel and left the boardroom, clearly displeased. The team looked at Michael with a mix of admiration and surprise. Jenny offered him a small, grateful smile, her eyes filled with relief. Michael knew that this moment had set him apart in their eyes, not as a newcomer, but as someone who genuinely cared about their well-being. Finding strength amid adversity. As the team dispersed, Michael felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He hadn't planned on challenging Carl publicly, but the opportunity had presented itself, and he knew it was necessary. His colleagues needed to see that they had someone on their side, someone who would stand up for them, even in difficult moments. Later that day, as Michael returned to his cubicle, Helen stopped by, leaning against the wall with an approving smile. "You really are different," she said, a hint of admiration in her voice. "Most people wouldn't dare to confront Carl, but you don't seem afraid of him." Michael chuckled softly, shaking his head. "It's not about fear. It's about doing what's right. If we don't stand up for each other, this place will never change." Helen nodded, her gaze thoughtful. Keep that attitude, Michael. People are noticing. And believe me, in a place like this, we need more people willing to speak up. Michael appreciated Helen's words, feeling a sense of camaraderie growing between them. She was a seasoned leader, someone who had fought her battles within the company, and her support meant more than she realized. He knew that together, they could start shifting the culture, one step at a time. End of day reflections. As he packed up to leave, Michael reflected on the day's events. He had challenged Carl, gained further trust from his team, and continued laying the groundwork for change. The road ahead was still uncertain, but he felt a renewed sense of determination. As he walked through the lobby and into the cool evening air, Michael allowed himself a rare moment of pride. This journey was about more than a title or a role. It was about transforming a culture that had lost its way, about standing up for people who deserved respect and recognition. Tomorrow, he would return with even greater resolve. Carl might tighten his grip, but Michael knew that true leadership wasn't about control. It was about empowering others. And when the time came to reveal his true position, he would be ready, not only to lead but to inspire, unveiling the plan and confronting the obstacles. After the tension-filled client meeting, a shift had started to ripple through the logistics department. Michael Johnson's defense of his coworkers had left a lasting impression, giving his team a renewed sense of hope and solidarity. The quiet, unassuming new hire was proving to be a catalyst, silently challenging the toxic norms that had governed the department for too long. But Michael knew the journey was far from over. The undercurrents of discontent ran deep, and Carl was growing increasingly antagonistic. As Michael arrived at Whitman Enterprises that morning, he felt the weight of the responsibilities ahead. He was here on a mission, not just to observe, but to make a difference that would resonate throughout the company. However, he had to navigate carefully. Revealing his true role prematurely could undermine his ability to learn and effect lasting change. Today, he was ready to take his plan further, connecting with more colleagues and gathering allies, all while managing Carl's growing hostility. Morning planning and strategy. Michael settled into his cubicle and reviewed his notes. Over the past few days, he had documented countless inefficiencies, from outdated software to disjointed communication channels between departments. He knew that if he wanted to address these problems effectively, he would need to approach it from multiple angles, working closely with his team, gathering data to back his proposals, and subtly challenging Carl's management approach. But today, he wanted to focus on the people, the heart of the company that had been overlooked. His first step was reaching out to different teams, starting with the IT department. If Whitman Enterprises was going to improve its infrastructure, it would play a vital role. Michael reached out to Kevin, an IT specialist he'd met briefly in the elevator the previous day. "Hey, Kevin," Michael greeted him in the break room. "I was wondering if I could ask you about the logistics software. I've noticed it's pretty outdated, and I was curious about any potential upgrades." Kevin raised an eyebrow, a little surprised that someone from logistics was taking an interest. "Honestly, we've been requesting an upgrade for years, but the budget keeps getting redirected. It's like they don't see how it affects productivity. You guys deal with most of the headaches, but trust me, we're just as frustrated." Michael nodded, mentally noting the information. "That's good to know. It's a shame we're all dealing with these roadblocks when a few improvements could make everyone's work easier." Kevin sighed. "Welcome to Whitman Enterprises, where everything is about squeezing the bottom line. If you're actually trying to get this change, you've got my support." Michael appreciated Kevin's honesty and recognized that this shared frustration could build unity between departments. As he left the break room, he felt a sense of purpose solidify within him. His vision was clear: unite the people, understand their needs, and build a case for change that the upper management couldn't ignore. A brewing confrontation with Carl. Back at his desk, Michael noticed Carl's stern gaze lingering on him from across the room. Ever since the client meeting, Carl had become increasingly watchful, as though waiting for an excuse to confront him. Michael knew he couldn't let Carl's scrutiny hinder his progress, but he also understood that a direct conflict was inevitable. Around midday, Carl approached Michael's cubicle, his expression tense. "Johnson," he said, his tone laced with suspicion, "I've been hearing that you've been talking to people outside of logistics. Mind telling me what's going on?" Michael looked up, meeting Carl's gaze evenly. "I'm just trying to understand how we can improve our workflow. A lot of the issues we face here stem from interdepartmental miscommunication, so I thought it might help to hear others' perspectives." Carl's frown deepened. "Your job is to do what I tell you, not to go poking around in other departments. You may think you know better, but you're here to learn, not to lead." Michael held back a smile, sensing Carl's insecurity. He realized that Carl saw him as a threat, someone who questioned the established order. Keeping his tone respectful, he replied, "Understood, Carl. My intention isn't to undermine you. I just want to find ways we can work more efficiently as a team." Carl's eyes narrowed, a flicker of irritation crossing his face. "Stick to your tasks, Johnson, and remember who's in charge here." Michael nodded, watching as Carl walked away, but he knew that this conversation was just the beginning. Carl's resistance was a clear sign that he sensed Michael's influence growing, and Michael prepared himself for the inevitable pushback, strengthening bonds with the team. After lunch, Michael gathered his colleagues in the break room, subtly initiating a conversation about their work experiences. He framed it as a casual chat, allowing each person to share their perspective without feeling pressured. "Anyone else feel like there's room for improvement here?" Michael asked, a light-hearted tone in his voice. Jenny chuckled, rolling her eyes. "That's an understatement. Between the outdated systems and Carl's management style, it feels like we're constantly swimming against the tide." Steve, who was usually reserved, chimed in. "Honestly, it's exhausting. I love the work, but it's hard to stay motivated when you know every mistake will be held against you." Michael listened intently, letting them voice their frustrations. He could see that the team's complaints were more than just gripes. They were the result of a long-standing culture that drained people's energy and morale. "Maybe we can work together to make things a little easier," Michael suggested, planting a seed of camaraderie. "If we share our challenges openly, we might be able to support each other and find solutions." His words seemed to resonate, and he saw a spark of hope in their expressions. They were beginning to see Michael as more than just a coworker. He was becoming a quiet leader, someone who valued their experiences and wanted to uplift them. A surprising ally in the boardroom. As the day wound down, Michael received an unexpected email, an invitation from Helen to attend an after-hours meeting in one of the executive boardrooms. Intrigued, he made his way there, finding Helen already seated, her demeanor poised and confident. "Michael," she greeted him with a nod, gesturing for him to sit. "I've been watching your interactions with the team, and I think you're exactly what this company needs. We've been lacking someone who understands the value of empathy and respect. That kind of leadership is rare around here." Michael was taken aback by her candid praise, but maintained his composure. "Thank you, Helen. I'm just trying to make a difference in any way I can. I believe in the potential of this team, but they need support, not fear." Helen nodded, her gaze thoughtful. "I believe you're onto something. In fact, I think the board might need to hear your perspective. I can arrange for you to attend the next executive meeting as an observer. You may be able to provide some insights they wouldn't hear otherwise." Michael hesitated, realizing the significance of this offer. It was an opportunity to glimpse the decision-makers at Whitman Enterprises and potentially influence them from within. But he knew that revealing too much too soon could jeopardize his mission. "That would be an honor, Helen," he said, a small smile tugging at his lips. "I'll do whatever I can to bring positive change to Whitman." As they discussed the details, Michael felt a surge of gratitude. Helen's support was invaluable. She understood his vision and was willing to champion it. With her in his corner, he was one step closer to making a tangible impact. The team's newfound unity. The next day, Michael returned to his cubicle to find a small group of colleagues gathered around Jenny's desk, discussing potential solutions to streamline their workflow. He watched quietly, impressed by their initiative. It seemed his encouragement was starting to take root, inspiring them to take action on their own. "Hey, Michael," Steve called, waving him over. "We were just brainstorming ways to simplify some of these processes. Figured if management won't do it, maybe we can find a workaround." Michael smiled, joining them. "That's the spirit. Sometimes the best solutions come from within. Let's see what we can come up with together." They spent the morning brainstorming, sharing ideas that ranged from reorganizing the data entry process to establishing a more efficient way of communicating with the IT department. As they worked, Michael saw a renewed energy in his colleagues' faces, a sense of purpose that hadn't been there before. By lunchtime, they had developed a rough plan, something they could present to Carl, or bypass him if necessary. Michael knew this newfound unity was more than just a workaround. It was the beginning of a cultural shift, a movement toward collaboration and respect. Preparing for the future. As the day ended, Michael reflected on the progress they had made. In just a few days, he had witnessed his team transform from weary, disheartened individuals into a united group with a shared purpose. They weren't just coworkers anymore. They were allies, each of them committed to building something better. But he also knew that Carl wouldn't sit by quietly as they pushed for change. The road ahead would be filled with resistance, and Michael would need to be strategic, balancing his role as a low-level employee with his ultimate goal of leading the company. As he left Whitman Enterprises that evening, Michael felt a quiet determination settle within him. The journey was far from over, but he was closer than ever to revealing his true role. And when the time came, he would do so with the support of his team, the respect of his allies, and a vision for a company that valued its people as much as its profits. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but Michael was ready. Whitman Enterprises was about to experience a change like never before, and he would be there, guiding it from within, until the day he could finally step into the light as the leader he was meant to be. The revelation and transformation. The morning light filtered through the towering glass walls of Whitman Enterprises as Michael Johnson approached the building with a steady heart and an unwavering focus. Today was the day he would reveal his true identity to his team and to Carl. His observations, connections, and behind-the-scenes planning had all led to this moment, and he was ready to step into his rightful role as the CEO, prepared to usher in the changes that Whitman Enterprises so desperately needed. As he entered the logistics department, he noticed his colleagues huddled together, talking in hushed voices. Their camaraderie and sense of unity had grown in recent days, thanks in part to the quiet empowerment Michael had fostered among them. They now looked to him not as a newcomer but as a true leader, someone they could trust and rely on. Final stand with the team. Before heading to the executive board meeting, Michael gathered his team in the break room for a final conversation. He wanted to give them the encouragement they deserved and prepare them for the changes he intended to bring. "Thank you all for your hard work and dedication these past weeks," Michael began, his tone earnest. "I've seen the challenges each of you faces every day, and I want you to know that you're not alone. The resilience you've shown, despite the obstacles, speaks volumes about your commitment to this company." Jenny, who had been especially grateful for Michael's support, looked at him with a warm smile. "We're just glad to have someone like you here, Michael. You've made us feel like we actually matter." The others nodded in agreement, their expressions reflecting a newfound sense of purpose. Michael felt a surge of gratitude toward them. Each of these individuals had endured years of working under an oppressive system, yet they still found strength in each other, and increasingly, in him. "Changes are coming," he said, his words laced with promise. "Today will be a turning point for Whitman Enterprises. Stay strong, support each other, and keep believing in yourselves. No matter what happens next, remember that you are valued." As he left the break room, his team's faces etched with gratitude and hope, Michael felt more resolved than ever. They were no longer just employees. They were his partners in transforming this company. Entering the boardroom as CEO, Michael made his way to the top floor, where the executive board meeting was set to take place. The halls were lined with sleek, minimalist decor, a stark contrast to the gritty reality of the logistics department. The boardroom was grand, with an expansive table surrounded by leather-bound chairs, and the atmosphere was charged with formality. When he entered, the board members looked up, surprised to see him there. Carl was seated on the opposite end of the table, his face paling as he registered Michael's presence. He glanced around, clearly confused and uneasy. "What's this about, Johnson?" Carl demanded, his voice unsteady. "This is a board meeting, not a place for entry-level employees." Michael remained calm, his gaze steady as he addressed the board. "Allow me to introduce myself properly," he began, his voice filled with quiet authority. "My name is Michael Johnson, and as of today, I am the new CEO of Whitman Enterprises." A ripple of shock passed through the room, board members exchanging astonished glances. Carl's expression transformed from confusion to disbelief, his face contorting with anger as he absorbed the revelation. This has to be some kind of mistake," Carl stammered. "You're just a logistics worker." Michael turned to Carl, his gaze unwavering. "No, Carl. I was asked by Richard Whitman himself to take over this company and restore the values it was built upon. Richard believed that leadership should come from understanding the people, from standing alongside them. That's why I started in logistics, to see firsthand what needed changing, and to know the people who make this company function." Carl's face flushed red as he struggled to maintain his composure, realizing that his dismissive treatment of Michael was about to have serious repercussions. Meanwhile, Helen, seated at the boardroom table, gave Michael a small nod of encouragement, her eyes reflecting pride. Michael continued, addressing the board with clarity and conviction. "Whitman Enterprises has drifted from its core values. Over the past weeks, I've observed a culture of fear, intimidation, and inefficiency. But the good news is that change is possible if we commit to creating an environment that respects and empowers our employees." He outlined his vision, presenting the data he'd gathered on productivity, employee satisfaction, and the areas where investment in technology and training could yield immediate results. His plan was comprehensive, addressing not only the financial aspects, but also the morale and well-being of the employees. One by one, the board members nodded, visibly impressed. They saw not only a capable leader, but someone who genuinely cared about the people who worked for him. The shift in the room was palpable, a recognition that the man before them was more than qualified to lead. Confronting Carl's resistance, as the board members began discussing Michael's proposals, Carl could no longer hold back. He rose from his seat, his voice laced with bitterness. "This is absurd. This company doesn't need soft leadership or coddling. It needs discipline and profitability, not hand-holding." Michael met Carl's gaze, his expression calm but resolute. "Discipline and profitability are important, Carl, but they are not achieved by breaking people's spirits or by creating a hostile work environment. True leadership is about inspiring people to give their best, not out of fear, but out of respect." Carl scoffed, attempting to dismiss Michael's words, but the board members were clearly receptive to the message. Helen, who had been listening intently, finally spoke up. "Michael's approach aligns with the vision Richard Whitman had for this company," Helen said firmly. "We've lost sight of that vision, and it's time we made a course correction. People are our greatest asset, and it's clear that under Michael's leadership, they will be treated as such." The board members murmured in agreement, and Carl's face twisted in frustration as he realized he was losing support. He glanced around the room, searching for an ally, but found none. Michael's words had resonated, and the board was ready to embrace a new era. The aftermath and transformation begins. After the board meeting concluded, Michael returned to the logistics department, where his team was waiting anxiously. News of his revelation as the CEO had already spread through the office, and the team watched him with a mixture of awe and disbelief as he walked in. Jenny was the first to speak, her voice filled with wonder. "Michael, or should I say Mr. Johnson, you're really the CEO." Michael smiled warmly, shaking his head. "Please, just call me Michael. Titles don't change who I am. I'm here to make things better for all of us." The team erupted in cheers, expressions of pride and gratitude shining on each face. Michael felt a deep sense of fulfillment. This was more than a professional victory. It was a validation of everything he believed in. He had earned their trust not through his title, but through his actions, and now he was ready to honor that trust by transforming the company from within. He gathered the team together and shared his plans openly, inviting them to contribute their ideas and voice their concerns. They discussed the inefficiencies in the workflow, the need for better communication channels, and ways to foster a culture of respect and collaboration. With each suggestion, Michael felt the energy in the room intensify. His team was no longer just following orders. They were active participants in shaping the future of Whitman Enterprises. This was the beginning of a new chapter, one built on shared values and mutual respect. A final encounter with Carl. Later that day, Carl approached Michael in the hallway, his face tight with anger. "So, this was your plan all along? To humiliate me? To take my place?" Michael looked at Carl, his expression a mix of understanding and firmness. "My goal was never to humiliate anyone, Carl. My goal was to show the value of respect, of leading with empathy. You have a choice. You can continue down the same path, or you can choose to grow and adapt." Carl's gaze hardened, but he remained silent, sensing that resistance would only deepen his isolation. Finally, he nodded stiffly and walked away, leaving Michael to reflect on the encounter. He knew that some people would resist change, but he was prepared to lead with patience, offering each person the chance to evolve alongside him. The beginning of a new era. As the weeks passed, Michael's changes began to take effect. The logistics department received new software, reducing work time and improving accuracy. Interdepartmental meetings were established to improve communication, and training programs were rolled out to empower employees with new skills. But the biggest change was in the atmosphere. Employees walked with renewed confidence, their voices heard, their efforts recognized. The company began attracting new talent, drawn to the values Michael had instilled. Whitman Enterprises was thriving, not only financially but in morale and unity. One afternoon, as Michael walked through the building, he was greeted with smiles and waves from employees in every department. He paused, taking in the vibrant energy that now filled the halls. This was the company he and Richard had envisioned, a place where people felt valued, where leadership was about service, and where success was measured not only in profits, but in the well-being of those who made it all possible. Michael knew that the journey had just begun, but he felt ready. Whitman Enterprises was on a new path, and he would lead it forward with integrity, resilience, and unwavering dedication to his team, the heartbeat of the company.